Okay, welcome everyone to the long-awaited second Environmental Physiotherapy Roundtable. Really happy to have you all here, both participants in the Zoom meeting as well as potential viewers on YouTube. This is the second time we're having this kind of roundtable as the EPA, the Environmental Physiotherapy Association. This time around, our roundtable is focused around the EPT Agenda 2023, which is a project that we launched earlier this year in the beginning of March. And the EPT Agenda 2023 is a call to action to physiotherapy education institutions around the world to integrate environmental and sustainability perspectives, planetary health perspectives, if you will, or eco-health, or whichever you prefer to call it, into entry-level physiotherapy education. We don't have any hard expectations on what type of content should be used within the project or as part of this call to action, or what methods should be used in the process. We really want to make this project about making a start and making a start in integrating the environment and sustainability issues and so forth into physiotherapy education, and therewith, over time, also really embedding it in physiotherapy or future physiotherapy practice. Another reason that we have chosen, for which we have chosen to not sort of specify content too much, is because we want to really draw a diversity in approaches and how this, these kinds of topics might be integrated into education that are true to the different sort of bioregional, social, cultural, and political contexts of each of the participating institutions. And I'll say a little bit more about those in a moment. So apart from being this call to action, the agenda, or the EPT Agenda 2023, is also a collaborative project where we're looking to develop an interactive, open access, inspiration base or knowledge base, if you will, on which we want to showcase, but also, interactively make available the content that we've developed over time, the methods we've used in embedding this in physiotherapy education, or actually the educational methods to share some of these issues with our students, as well as some of the challenges along the way, potential solutions, and also ideas for the future, so that we can build on this kind of database or knowledge base in the future, and develop this area a lot more, hopefully. So at today's roundtable, the speakers are representative from some of our participating institutions. In no particular order, we have Anna Söderlund here from Mälardalen University in Sweden. We have Kenneth Chance Larsen here from the University of Central Lancashire in the UK. We have Ricky Bell from Aotearoa New Zealand Wintec Institute in Hamilton. We have Julia Chevan here from Springfield, Massachusetts, the College of, help me, Julia, it's the college called Springfield College. That was simple.
It's Springfield College, right. Yeah, it's easy.
And, yeah. Yes, and then we have David Nichols from AUT University in New Zealand, Joost van Wiegen, I hope something like that, from Netherlands, Han University in Nijmegen. We have Robert Richter from the University in Freiburg in Germany, Adriana Vieira from Brazil, specifically the Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Sul, and we have Karin Mostert from the University of Pretoria in South Africa, as well as myself, Philip Maric. I'm the founder and executive chair of the Environmental Physiotherapy Association, and I'm also in some kind of, I suppose, lead position of the Environmental Physiotherapy Agenda 2023, and I am based at the University of Tromsø in Norway, in the far north of Norway. So we do have a few other participating institutions in this project. At this point in time, it's 18 different institutions from around the world. We also have the Trinity College in Dublin on board, as well as 2 more schools from Germany. I'll skip over the naming. We also have the Oxford Brookes University in the UK, another school that's not represented today, Otago University in New Zealand. We have a university in Switzerland on board, and also a university from Chile. So it's really, we've got some good representation from around the world, and we hope that many more schools will continue joining, or schools and universities will continue joining the project, so that we can develop this really urgently needed field together. The idea behind today's roundtable is actually that this is one of the meetings that we would normally have amongst participating institutions, where we would discuss how things are going with the project and about how things are going with implementation or ideas around what we might integrate into our programs in this field. But what we wanted to do, so at the moment we have these meetings quarterly, every 3 months or so. What we wanted to do this time around is somewhat actually in the spirit of this agenda and the way we've set it up. We've set this up as a really quite transparent project, and we're going to continue sharing about it as it continues to happen. And I think this sort of transparency that we want to embrace and have be part of the project is really important, because I think in today's time where, these issues that we're ultimately looking at, some pretty significant environmental challenges that we're all facing and the related health challenges, I think they're really, what they require really flies in the face of some of the more sort of competitive aspects of sometimes academic work, where we try to do something at our university that maybe is better, more innovative, more this, more that than at other universities. I think this is all about sharing and all about doing it together as best and as much as we can, so yes, this is, our attempt at sharing these topics a little bit more widely yet again. So what we want to cover today, hopefully, is we'll see how it goes. We haven't really set a distinct sort of schedule of what specifically we want to talk about, but hopefully we'll touch on some of the possible content that might be thought of in what we refer to as environmental physiotherapy education, just for the moment. Also, some of the methods in education that can be used, some of the challenges that might be met along the way, solutions to them, and loads of ideas for future practice, research, education, and so on. So what I was thinking is that rather that we go around and just say, okay, I'm doing this at my school and I'm doing this at my school and so on, I was going to suggest a kind of conversation starter that has to do with something I've been thinking about a lot over the last last couple of weeks, actually. So I'll try to explain this way. I think we've thought about the environment and physiotherapy as quite separate for the longest time. And, it's been argued that overcoming this disconnect from the environment in the healthcare professions, including physiotherapy, but also in just, let's say, Western influenced societies in general, or cultures, is a really critical point. So with this in mind, I think that one of our first sort of key tasks is to identify how the environment is actually always already in absolutely everything we think and do. And so with that in mind, what I've been thinking about recently, and I'm not sure why, it's just kind of where my thoughts have been stuck, is whether there's maybe something to be said about finding and teaching about the environment, or how the environment connects to human health and functioning in our anatomy and physiology modules or courses or paper, or whichever it's called in your particular case. So making something more explicit that's probably already there. And this is maybe, we might say, in addition to that, at least can we find out how that can be done as long as we're still teaching anatomy and physiology and physiotherapy. It's kind of a potentially big side note. So is it possible to teach something like and this is, I'm going to close on this, something like the environmental composition of the body, or the environmental anatomy and physiology of the body, to show its fundamental interconnectedness to the environment, and how that interconnection or that leakiness of the human body is actually fundamental to our health and functioning. I'll leave the question sort of in the round, and everybody can feel free to jump in. And if you don't want to speak to this point, feel free to speak to anything else.
My thoughts went to the water immediately. We are water, and we need water so much. And the clean water is really big part of the environmental problem. So that was just an association when you were talking about physiology. So water is something we could at least discuss with the students, how it is linked with the environmental problems.
Yeah, that's nice, Anna. Water as a part of the environment. I would say also that we can't look upon physiology without environment, as we are environment towards each other. And actually, otherwise we're just a human in a green screen or something, which is kind of ridiculous. So we are part of the environment, and also not only in water as a problem, it's actually the physiology, is the interaction between us in the environment and us being the environment, as we are being part of water. I would say at the same time, it's the water, it's the air, it's everything around us, what surfaces, it's an interactional part. And the moment we start from a problematic part, the moment we start polluting the parts around us, of the external parts of us, then actually we're also polluting ourselves. So that's something that's constantly finding the balance. So physiology is there. At the same time, if we look upon anatomy, when you started talking about it, I was thinking, okay, when we look upon anatomy, mostly I would say that anatomy is within the body, but the anatomy outside of the body, which is in a different realm. And then it gets really interesting. So it's the water we swim in. Is that also not part of our anatomy in a way, or actually what contains the water? So we can, it depends a little bit how far are we going to stretch, or maybe more how far are we managed to stretch our thoughts in this one.
I think that goes, what Joost is saying there, to that point about respiratory physiotherapy. And this is something I've thought a lot about. An oxygen molecule that's in the atmosphere around me, when does that become part of me? Is it when it's 6 feet away, floating in the air? Is it when it's in my mouth or nose? Is it in my trachea? Is it part of me when it's in my bronchi? Or is it only part of me when it goes into the plasma or into the mitochondria or into the muscle tissues? When is it part of me? Because 65% or so of your body mass is made up of oxygen, more so than carbon. And so we are massive amounts of inorganic compounds, and we shed skin, and skin comes and goes. So the sense, and then we're also, as Tim Morton says, we're made up of, people are made up of thoughts and clothing and attitudes and a whole bunch of things. So actually the amount of me anatomically that we celebrate in physiotherapy is some kind of homogeneous uniform structure that we're taught about in an anatomy textbook. Is a mythology. It's a fiction. The reality of our bodies is that we are constantly interchanging with the environment. We are part of the environment. We shouldn't really be studying anatomy and physiology or pathology or any of those traditional subjects in isolation from thinking about the environment that we are, what's it that Morton says, is in commonwealth with.
Feel free to just jump in at any point if you wish. I'm not going to necessarily respond to each comment. So,
and CO2, yeah. What we are breathing out. I remember there was a debate in Sweden, maybe last year or something, that people should not have so many kids because they are the biggest environmental problem. Not only that they are breathing, but also when they are growing up. They are a big environmental problem. I don't agree, but it's what we are breathing and what we are using to grow up is part of the environment. We are using, of course, we are using environment, but we are also producing something to environment.
Yeah, I think what's the thing that's really interesting about, like to me, about some of these questions with anatomy and physiology. You know, I was thinking about these kind of particular subjects because they're still first-year subjects in physiotherapy. They're still kind of, they sit still at that foundation of physiotherapy very often, or most often, I would say. And what I was thinking is, yeah, well, you know, anatomy and physiology, they can be a good example for how we can, you know, just make some of those connections to the environment a little more specific. You know, we can say, well, we breathe in oxygen that trees breathe out. You know, we exhale CO2 that, I don't know, contributes to, I don't know, greenhouse gas emissions and so forth. And, you know, we consist of water, and our cell composition, you know, involves inorganic compounds as well as organic, and so on. So we could make this a topic that's about inserting little things into existing physiotherapy curricula and modes of thinking around physiotherapy. But actually, if we give way to this, what am I going to say, to this seeming invasion, or to this much, actually invasion is not right, to this much broader reality, like, what does that mean? If that's the foundation of physiotherapy, where does it take us over the rest of the course of our educational programs? You know, if that's the broader foundation of physiotherapy, what's the physiotherapy that you get to after your 3 or 4 years of study or whatever? And what will you have studied in between? So I don't necessarily have the answer. I just find it a fascinating question.
Mm-hmm. I think as physiotherapists, we are interested in functional anatomy, especially. And so I think we could include the question in our lessons, how we interact in and with the environment. For example, I see a lot of these electric scooters here in the cities of Germany, and the electric scooters are for the last kilometer to work. But I think the people should walk to the last kilometer to their work. And so I think it's a kind of influence that we have for our students to say, use your body and ask how we interact with environmental things. So we walk in the environment, we are part of the environment, how Joost said. And so that's a question for me, think about the function in environment.
And there we come to the behavior. What is our behavior? What are the psychological courses we are having in our curriculum, and courses where we are talking about movement behavior and all those decision cognitions and decisions patients are doing using the scooters instead of walking, for example.
It's actually also quite interesting if you just go a little bit back into physiology, how we have adjusted ourselves as human bodies, or actually as all living creatures, towards the environment, or actually in relation to environment. So if we probably in a science fictional manner step forward, we can imagine if everything is going on scooters and that kind of thing, that will do some increases or difficulties or changes in the human body. So human physiology will change. It's the same thing that astronauts or cosmonauts actually at the moment, when they are without gravity, their body composition is changing. So what will be happening with our body if we only use this kind of scooter systems, or when we have now already turned our whole living environment into, it's not human-centric, it's actually car-centric, I would say, to most of the Western world, especially here in the Netherlands. Everything is around cars. So people drive, they try to park the car so close to the place where they want to go as possible, so they don't have to walk, they don't have to move. So what will that do in the end with our human body? So physiology is constantly, and anatomy is constantly interchangeably. And at the same time, as Anna is saying, the environment is actually motivating or facilitating or challenging our behaviors. And that that's something which is quite interesting, how that connection actually works there.
Joost, I'm slightly shocked and disappointed that from the Netherlands, you say that it's a car-centric culture. I was hoping that it was all about the bike. So you just shattered one of my illusions there. But I'm wondering if it's, I'm a proponent for breaking down silos in teaching, as I'm sure lots of you are as well, and lots of people out there, trying to uncompartmentalize teaching. So teaching things in context rather than in isolation, and using case-based learning, problem-based learning whenever possible. And I think that potentially gives us an opportunity to link very naturally with environmental issues. Dave, you talked about the oxygen molecule, and I really liked the way you described that. I think you know, when we talk about anything to do with oxygen exchange and cardiorespiratory health, it would be amiss not to mention the impact that air pollution has on health. So if you have a case-based learning where somebody has a respiratory disease, they live in an area where there is air pollution, which there are many to choose from, and then we can talk about the statistics of people dying each year from air pollution. So is it our responsibility as physios to draw the patient's attention to this fact so they can take steps, whatever they might be, to try and address that in their own way? So making every contact count, which is a big push in the UK of positive health behavior, but pushing that into environmental issues as well as just sort of pure health matters.
Yeah, I think you raise a great point with that, not just thinking about, I'm going to move it from thinking about patients to thinking about populations. And if what we're doing is teaching our students about population health, then we're not just teaching them that air pollution has an impact on whatever the cardiovascular disease is, but we start by talking about disease and say, what are the root causes of this disease? And when you get down to root causes, you get beyond just, it's a cellular problem, it's a biologic problem, it's also an air quality problem, it's also a policy problem, it's also a housing problem. And then we're teaching our students to not just treat the patient who comes in with COPD, but treat the society that created the policies that result in some neighborhoods having worse pollution or housing problems or some of those other pieces. So I think we have to teach our students, whether it be anatomy and physiology or any other topic, the individual health issues, and also move it back to population and policy.
This makes, to me, this makes perfect sense that we say we have a responsibility there, as we know, as you both, Jalia and Ken, you mentioned, we created an environment in a way because we tried to manipulate it, but at the same time we know, and we did it from a kind of reductionist way of looking upon human bodies or about health. The more we see the interaction, we have a responsibility, and also to pass it on to our students, at least to get into the question, what does it do? So not only on the short term, but actually on the long run, from what is actually there. And I think that most of the students or the upcoming professionals are really keen and open to it, and to take that responsibility a little bit more to see from what's there, because we can start treating like the fire department, treating whatever comes next, but we can look ahead. We have this possibility to imagine what's actually coming in front of us. And already looking there, it's a little bit weird that we don't look upon air pollution, but then we start treating COPD based on air pollution. So then it's kind of a, where are we going to?
I think it's a fascinating subject, this idea that Philip raised in the opening about the environment always already being there in physiotherapy, because, I mean, quite obviously, people live in the world. So from a critical point of view, you'd have to say that in the history of physiotherapy, we've had to work pretty hard to actually eliminate the environment from physiotherapy. And all of our practices and our ethos and our theories, if you look at them critically, they work quite hard at isolating the body as machine kind of idea. And there's sort of it's whether it's active or a passive kind of rejection of the environment, or a move to place the environment or a social context or a person-centeredness or psychosocial aspects of health to the margins, a willful act to push those things to the margins. So I think there's some work to be done to get us to critically evaluate the ways that we've done that in our curricula, in our scopes of practice, and the way that we've done things. Because one of the fundamental questions has to be whether the environment is going to be added in. It's going to be a module or a course that's added into the physio curriculum and is sort of bolted onto the existing way of thinking without really challenging the existing way of thinking on a fundamental basis. Or whether environmental thinking, consciousness, becomes a primary philosophy for the way we think about physiotherapy. And there's a lot of competition for this. Obviously, there are people who would advocate for things like biopsychosocial models and patient-centered care, or a bioscientific approach to physiotherapy needs to be primary. But so it'd be one of the issues is how do we make the case that an environmental physiotherapy might be one of the guiding principles? And I'd be interested to hear Ricky's thoughts on this, particularly from a kaupapa Māori perspective, because here in New Zealand, and I think it's probably true in a lot of post-colonial countries, Canada, Australia, India, and parts of Africa, there's a real move to try and look at indigenous ways of thinking about health that don't place the environment as a kind of add-on course. They are implicit in the way that you think about practice. So I don't know. I mean, I think that seems to me to be an interesting way to frame the whole question about what does physio do with this? Does it just add it in? Does it supplement what we already have? Or does it change something at a root and branch level about the whole philosophy on which physiotherapy training and learning and practice is based?
Thanks, Dave. Firstly, I'd just like to mihi to acknowledge Philip for pulling us all together from around the planet today. It's a really important topic, or kaupapa as we say here in our country. I'd just like to acknowledge Joost as well for what he was saying before about we have to be careful not to be reductionist in our approach. And I'll take that back to what Anne said right at the very start around when she's thought about the water. So in terms of the way, from an Indigenous lens, here in New Zealand, the First Nations people, we have a saying that says, ko au ki te awa, ko te awa ko au. And what that means is, I am the river and the river is me. So we don't separate ourselves from the water, from the land, from the air, from the sky. So we are one and the same. And we actually have whakapapa or genealogy back to our environment. So whether we make it more explicit in our curriculum or I think a lot of us are doing it anyway. Maybe we just need to draw our attention to it a little bit more. But from an Indigenous lens, here in New Zealand, we have the privilege of a new program of being able to shape our curriculum so that environmental context is woven into our curriculum, be it by stealth maybe, but maybe we need to make it more explicit, I'm not sure. So thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Ricky. I really like that saying. Of course, it's not surprised I like that. I suppose it speaks right to me. So what I was thinking, I think that kind of really makes the point, like for me also, and it's kind of goes back to what Dave was saying just before. These kinds of developments, like the stuff that we're talking about and trying to do, integrating these environmental and sustainability perspectives into physiotherapy education, or just making them more explicit, whichever way you might want to call it. Is happening in other healthcare professions as well. And everybody is kind of trying to find their way of how to do it. And, there's always this question about, is it an add-on course or is it something that we try and sort of weave in and so on? And for a while, I've been thinking, surely the easiest way is not to change much and just to sort of weave it a little bit in here, a little bit in there, and so forth. But I think that like where I'm right now with my thinking is that doing that kind of weaving in here, weaving in there, and so forth, in some ways is quite a lot more radical because of its implications. Like we talked about with anatomy and physiology, I think it's like that weaving in, it has these more radical implications of completely blowing up how we sort of think and do physiotherapy, as opposed to making it something that I know in some cases, like I've been engaging a lot with people in other healthcare professions that are also trying to do these things. And there's a bunch of thinking around making it, I'm not sure what the English word is right now, but it's like an optional add-on course that you can choose, for example, while you're going through your medical training. And increasingly, I'm thinking that is just the strangest thought, as if you could make as if you could make whether or not you engage with climate change a choice, or whether or not you engage with O2 and CO2 some kind of choice. And you can say, well, no, it's not for me. I don't exchange O2 and CO2, or I'm not the river. And so, you know, to go to Ricky's example again.
But
and
that's
so
what
for
I'm
me,
suggesting.
Like,
that's what I'm suggesting, Philip, is exactly what we have done. And I think a lot of the orthodox health professions have been successful and have been rewarded because they've done that. So I think one of the interesting questions here is, if physiotherapy, for instance, moved to a fundamentally environmental philosophy or a person-centered care philosophy or a biopsychosocial philosophy, one of the barriers to going towards any fundamental way of thinking is that you assume a kind of generic understanding of the world. You have to take on a concept or an understanding of the world that can't be owned by physiotherapy because it's too big. It can't be owned by medicine or nursing or architecture or the legal profession. And so you lose the distinctive edges around what physiotherapy is. You have to basically give up the idea that physiotherapy is a fundamentally different entity to, say, medicine or nursing or architecture, because you've all adopted a notion of the environment. There's nothing particularly physiotherapeutic about it, because it's shared by all, it's common. So I think one of the issues is that the reasons why we don't do that kind of thing, that we don't wholly embrace a fundamentally shared concept of the world, is because we're holding on to the idea that we need to be distinctive from other people because we're in competition with them for space in the public healthcare system, for funding. We won't give up the idea of physiotherapy as distinctive. And that's been a centuries-long project to try and prove that we're different to nurses and doctors and osteopaths and chiropractors. So I wonder whether that's a fundamental barrier to us adopting anything that might be shared by other people, like, for instance, the environment.
Julia, I'm seeing your microphone unmuted. Would you like to jump in? Oh, muted again. That's a no.
I would like to continue whether was it David who had the last one?
Yes.
The development of a profession. How do we want to develop our professional area, the physiotherapy? What do we see? This is about 2030. What do we see? Where are we as a physiotherapist in 2030? It's only 10 years. Remarkable, 10 years is very short time. So maybe we are not so far in the environmental thinking, but we need to develop. We need to embrace these parts, new things that we obviously think that are good things. They are important, and we need it, and we need to teach these topics further to our students. And that is how we also develop our profession, what I think. But it is I agree that we have been fighting really hard to be distinct, and is that really putting us in a box where we have hard to come out? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have the answer. I can maybe only add to the question. Like for me, another example that speaks to this same problem, maybe just into clarification for something that Anna was just saying now, she was referring to 2030. This is, of course, sort of the date set for the hopeful achievement of the UN Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. So that was that reference. For me, like, again, like to add to this question around, in some ways, what does this mean for our profession and where does it go? And is it a path of further distinction, or, I'm not sure, maybe specialization or something like that? Or is it going somewhere completely different to a kind of more shared position? COVID apparently, of course, is absolutely a topic this year. We've launched the Environmental Physiotherapy Agenda 2023 on the 2nd of March, while COVID was, already there. And it's been something that's been also in some ways in the way of people reacting to the agenda a little bit more, universities and schools reacting to the agenda a bit more, and for all sorts of good reasons, because everybody just had to and still has to adjust to this strange new situation. The thing that for me is interesting about COVID from the perspective of this agenda and this kind of environmental physiotherapy idea is that in some ways, I think holding up teaching about the social and environmental drivers of COVID, so not teaching that, is actually perpetuating the pandemic in a way. What I mean by that is that, we know that the sort of the spread of COVID and its emergence and so forth is very much related to how humans produce food and how humans produce shelter or agriculture and urbanization around the world. It's about how we relate to animals and so on and so on. And so physiotherapy has nested itself for a very long time in this physical rehabilitation space where we just react to and respond to a problem that's already there. And we, like in the case of Joost mentioned before, he's dropped out somehow, I've noticed, but he's mentioned before also the example of COPD. So we're quite happy to treat COPD. But the problem with COPD, we've got Karin back again, the problem with COPD in many ways maybe is not COPD, but like Ken was mentioning before, air pollution. And if we turn towards air pollution, what does that mean for that arguable distinction of our profession? Maybe a car engineer that's working on electric cars or hydro, whatever cars, could also be argued to actually be a physiotherapist because he or she might be reducing the incidence of COPD. As one example. Dave mentioned the architect, and there might be several more such examples.
Yeah, I hear that, but in reverse, do you think that if there was environmental engineering, that the engineer would argue that we're an engineer as a physiotherapist if we're working with someone who has COPD, but not, working on the car? I don't think so. So I don't think that person is a physiotherapist, but I think as physiotherapists, we need to, to go back to this, we need to be in the sphere where what we're doing is, again, not just teaching our students the physiology that produces COPD, but having our students investigate the root causes of COPD. In this case, it has to do with the input to the body, which is the air, and the air that is polluted, and the particulars of why some people are breathing even more polluted air than others, and how the structures of our societies and the policies of our societies produce that. Does that mean that we can be physiotherapists who become engineers? Yes. And shouldn't we also be physiotherapists who become politicians and policymakers and public health practitioners? I think all of that. I think that one of the problems we've had in physiotherapy is that we've put our blinders on and been only physiotherapists. And as opposed to, in the United States, when somebody who's a physician runs for Congress, they always get identified as, oh, look, this congressperson, he's a or she's a physician. And so I wouldn't mind it if there were some people in Congress where they're identified, oh, this congressperson, they're a physiotherapist, and they're going to work on policies that have to do with all of the issues around human health and mobility.
I think healthcare is complex enough to for there to be a need for different healthcare workers with different skills, different specialties. Whether the division we have currently with medics, nurses, physios, OTs, dietitists, etc., is the optimal solution or skill sort of separation of skills or expertise or responsibilities. I don't know, but it's what we have. And things perhaps change over time. I don't think it will be a sudden revolution in any direction. I don't think there's sometimes the fear of, particularly for a lot of health professionals, so away from doctors and nurses, for them to become generic health workers has been seen as yet another drive to push down wages and get jobs done cheaper by these health professionals. So I think there's still a role for physio as a specialism. Perhaps what we define within that role can change, and things are changing, I think, slowly. But maybe this pandemic, like for many other things, will be some sort of a catalyst, so we can refocus on the more important things. I think there are challenges with embedding green content or environmental content into curriculum. I think another aspect that I think perhaps should also receive some attention is sort of preaching beyond the group of converted people. So we're all here pretty much in agreement that the environment is something we need to focus more on. We need to think about sustainability. And the challenge is maybe to speak to not just our students, but to colleagues as well. How do we ensure buy-in from our nearest colleagues within our programs, from wider within our institutions? So, how do we make meaningful change and urgent change without sort of ostracizing people or burning bridges?
Yeah, I mean, this is for me where, for example, where we've situated the agenda is, or the EPT Agenda 2023 is that, yes, we are like today and right now, and I would say some of our listeners and also some EPA members and so forth, and quite a few more others actually in the world of physiotherapy are quite in agreement with us. But there's also still lots and lots of people within physiotherapy that just like still are not making the connection between what does physiotherapy have to do with the environment or environmental issues and so forth. And I think, again, that's where kind of like also going into education right away is so important, because yeah, it just ensures that, for future generations, this question about that I'm still getting very often, like really regularly, this question about what does physiotherapy have to do with the environment won't be such a basic sort of question anymore. They'll be like, I'm hoping that there will be a base understanding that, oh yeah, of course they have something to do with each other. And then, something else can hopefully grow out of that. So in terms of, I think there is something to be done, yes, like I said, a lot of our colleagues in other healthcare professions are working on the same topics. And I think in terms of where we are in history right now, we're still at a point in time where every healthcare professional still needs to know this and hear this message also, because it's not not spread as widely as anatomy and physiology, let's say.
Do you think part of the problem is the way that we talk about the environment as being something out there, as something not part of us, but the environment is the nice green space where the trees and the fields are and the flowers grow, as opposed to thinking of the environment as the air that you're breathing in the room that you're in right now, the computer screen in front of you, the car that you drive to work in, the dirty stuff, the polluting stuff, the consumer products and things around you. They're not separate from the environment. They're as much of the environment as the lemon tree in my front garden. But we tend to think of, I think we are sometimes simplistic about talking about the environment as in a way that implies that there's a nice, good environment, trees, fields, flowers, vegetables, and then there's a thing that we don't really want to include in that conversation because it's, in quotes, bad for the environment.
I was thinking what our students, especially those in the beginning of the education, the program, they when they have the psychology courses, they are asking, what does this has to do with us? We are going to be physiotherapists. Why do we need psychology? And I would like to ask the question, psychology and physiotherapy, environmental questions and physiotherapy. What do you think they would say, which are more connected? I would say that they would catch the environmental part. They would immediately think about physical activity, of course. Everybody thinks about that. So I think they, when put those things together, they would be, okay, physiotherapy and environmental questions, they belong together. That would be I think I will ask the question from our new students in January, what they do think.
I don't want to put anyone on the spot here, but I do see Adriana smiling and knowing, and I know that something she does relates to this question quite a lot, because Adriana actually takes some of her students outdoors in some ways to explore exactly this question. I know that you were preferring not to say too much today, Adriana, but maybe would you like to jump in a little bit and say something, or as you prefer?
I can try. Yes, we have an activity with the students where we go to the botanical garden in my city, and we have some conversation with a professor of dance, the course of dance in the same department of mine, and he worked in the middle of the nature with some Indians dance and more popular dance, and we talk about the connection with nature, original people, and it's a very interesting and amazing experience for the students. I think it's simple, but it's very. We start the morning walking in silence, and each one can go in different parts of the botanical garden, and after we meet each other to have this class with this professor, and he is very special, and he talk about the understanding of health of Indians in Brazil. And and they have to dance in a community movement because it's like a very grounding dancing, and they have to dance together in a grand round, and it's so beautiful, and it's always talk about that in a final work that they do in my course. So I think it's important. We have a day where we go and visit the campus and talk with the students about all sustainability issues we have with the garbage and, with other things. And so we have a lecture with them about this subject, and we go outside and we walk, and you look how many garbage we are in the flower, and we keep it and put in a sack, and look how many things is there. And so it's the little things that I think can be important in the first year.
Yeah, I was just thinking of two things, in some ways. So I think part of what Adriana is speaking to also is something that we maybe haven't talked about so much today, or yet anyway, is, that part of this question is also, not just what content do we integrate, but how do we integrate it, and what are sort of our teaching methods that we apply and so forth. And some of what Adriana here is saying is something that, I definitely also feel drawn to, and maybe exactly because I am a physiotherapist, is a kind of embodied and experiential approach to learning about this link between the environment and physiotherapy. And if I add that to the comment that Dave was making before, maybe there is also something to be said about, doing that kind of embodied and experiential project that makes this link between the environment and physiotherapy really clear, but not by going outside, but by staying in that, I'm going to say, typical physiotherapy classroom that has the treatment table still inside and so forth, and going through the objects that are in that room and discussing how they are also the environment, and how they are some of those, maybe bad aspects of the environment that we want to exclude sometimes and so forth. And, so two thoughts there, but maybe, to go into something slightly different, I think there is something to be said about tackling this in a really embodied and experiential way in terms of teaching methods in physiotherapy, because I think physiotherapy students, but also physiotherapists, can still really sort of relate to that very readily. Which, if I go back to also Robert's thought at the beginning about, that I'm still sort of thinking about somewhere in the back of my head, about this idea of functional anatomy as something that happens outside the body, or as a being about how the body interacts with the environment. I could imagine a fairly interesting and exciting embodied and experiential course of that kind of functional anatomy in physiotherapy as well, where we go outside and observe the interaction of bodies with the environment, and potentially friendly, if you will, interactions, as well as not so friendly interactions.
If I understood Dave right, then he would say it's not only a question of physiotherapy in a black box, or like this, separated from other parts of the society. So I thought about, for our students, we are teachers, and we attend our students on the first time from the school time to be adults in the real life. So we attend the students, and we are examples for our students. And so it is not only a question of physiotherapy, it's also a question how we get them a view of life in the outside, also outside of physiotherapy. So I think we shouldn't forget that we have young people, and we have an influence on that people, on their whole life, not only in their physiotherapist's life.
Yeah, and we are their role models as a physiotherapist too, when we are teachers. So what we say and what we do and how we act, I think it gives quite large impact on many of them, not maybe all of them, all students, but many of them. So I think we should also look ourselves as a teachers, what vocabulary we are using, for example, in anatomy teaching.
I think that's a fantastic point, actually, because one of the things about modeling the kinds of ways of thinking to students in the curricula, and as experienced practitioners and teachers and researchers, if we can't work out how to integrate the environment into the curriculum or make it at the heart of physiotherapy, how can we ask our students and new graduates to do it? So we have to model it. We have to work out a way to make the curriculum a different kind of thing if we want to value this and put it at the forefront of what we do, so that we can show the students how they carry it forward.
I'm wondering, and not to put you on the spot too much, Ricky, but I'm wondering if you see in your program some places or some ways in which, for example, this idea that you shared with us before, or the saying that you shared with us before, is comes through in the curriculum or is passed on also as part of the physiotherapy curriculum in some way. I don't know, maybe, yeah, not to put you on the spot, but just a question that came up for me.
Your questions are welcome, Philip. It comes through in a gentle way. I think it's evident from everyone's conversations today that we have to be careful not to separate the environment from us, because they are interwoven. And I'll just to touch on an earlier point from Dave around we don't see the environment as a commodity. You talk about molecules and water and oxygen and such like. We don't claim ownership of that, and because it's part of who we are. So it's kind of difficult to separate the two in terms of whether or not our students see that in an explicit way in the program, probably not. But in terms of some of our decolonized approaches that we adopt in some of our modules in first, second, and third year, students get to view the environment in a different way. So perhaps ways that they've not thought about before. And in terms of us identifying or moving away from physio, in terms of claiming our space, we are restricted with our curriculum, with our regulatory bodies who give us accreditation. So here in New Zealand and Australia, the current 26 physio schools all have to meet a certain level of curriculum content so that our registration bodies can have confidence that our graduates meet a certain standard. So they do have the power over us to say what we can and cannot include in our program. So that's a challenge from the start. So we just have to reshape it and present it in a different way so that our regulatory authorities feel that we are teaching physio. So it's that's why I kind of said before that it's environmental physio by stealth. Presenting it to students in a way that makes them look at the world with a critical lens, and not just with a physiotherapy lens. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's what we're trying to do anyway.
I think that's very good, Ricky. Thank you. I'm also going to actually take that as a sort of as a hook to bring us to the end of our roundtable today. We've said that we'd keep it to about an hour, and this is kind of quite spot on, and I think a nice note to end on. I want to, first of all, thank all of you for participating today and making this happen. Also, thanks to Joost, whose internet disappeared, for being here, the part that he was here. So again, thank you all for being here today and having this discussion. This was really good, for the fact that it was entirely unrehearsed and we just jumped in and took it wherever it went, quite organically and very fitting to this topic. I think this was a beautiful hour. Thank you for that. I've got loads of ideas and stuff to think about. For listeners, whether live or viewers, whether they're viewing live or later on, if you're a student in physiotherapy or if you're an educator in physiotherapy and you're wanting this stuff, kind of environmental and sustainability perspectives, planetary health, eco-health, sustainable healthcare, whatever you call it, to be integrated into your curricula and into your schools, please get in touch with us. We're definitely absolutely keen on more universities and schools from around the world joining us. I want to say there's no time to waste, and the time really, is now, like we said in the agenda as well. So thank you all again. I'll take us offline.
Thanks,
now.
Philip.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing, Philip. Bye.